As the world watches the Israel-Hamas war closely, we must not ignore the other war. Because today, Ukraine has endured the heaviest Russian shelling of 2023. Russian bombardment hit over 100 Ukrainian settlements just in a span of 24 hours, leaving entire towns and villages devastated. This comes at a time when the Western world, led by the United States, has been occupied with the conflict in West Asia. Europe also seems to be getting war-weary. And most importantly, the situation on the ground is not looking good for Ukraine. Ukraine's commander-in-chief has signaled a new phase in the war with Russia, which will potentially allow Moscow to rebuild its military strength. The shift comes amid reports that North Korea has supplied Russia with 2 months' worth of artillery shells. Ukraine also reported a Russian attack on an oil refinery in Kremenchuk, a central industrial city. There were no casualties, but it took almost 100 firefighters several hours to put out the fire. Meanwhile, in northeastern Kharkiv, the overnight shelling killed one person and another was killed in the southern Kherson region. As winter approaches, Ukraine is increasingly concerned that Russia will intensify its attacks. Moscow has shifted from a defensive stance during Ukraine's counteroffensive to a more aggressive posture. In the coming weeks, there is a growing fear that Russian forces may target Ukraine's energy infrastructure, same as last year, just ahead of the harsh winter months. A fear now confirmed by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Secretary, Oleksiy Danilov. He told a local TV channel that Russia was preparing attacks against Ukraine's key infrastructure once the temperatures get lower. He said, and I quote, "They will attempt to strike at our critical infrastructure facilities which ensure daily activities." But the Ukrainian official says that the country is prepared and that allies were providing additional air defenses. According to one of Ukraine's closest allies, the United Kingdom, Russia was stockpiling missiles to meet their goal this winter. Ukraine's eastern front lines are seeing fierce fighting, with Russian troops making advances on Thursday. Ukrainian forces said that they repelled a new Russian assault near the town of Vuhledar. It is situated in eastern Donetsk. It is a Ukrainian-held bastion located at a strategic intersection between the eastern and southern front lines. It has seen some of the bloodiest fighting of the 20-month-old war. According to the Ukrainian military, Russia was trying to regroup after losses near another flashpoint city, Avdiivka. They fear more Russian attacks here. Russian troops are trying to encircle Avdiivka. They renewed the push to capture the embattled town in mid-October by overwhelming Ukrainian positions with constant barrage of artillery and waves of troops and fighting vehicles. Ukraine's top general has openly acknowledged Russia's strategic advantage. In a conversation with the British newspaper, General Valery Zaluzny admitted that the conflict has evolved into a World War I-style stalemate. He emphasized Moscow's superior numbers. He underscored the urgent need for the Ukrainian army to acquire new military capability and tech innovation to break out of the war phase. And General Zaluzny's statement appears accurate at this point. If the current situation on ground persists, Ukrainian troops, fatigued after months of counteroffensives, may find no rest. A prolonged attritional warfare carries big risks. The Ukrainian general has emphasized it will only benefit Russia. Almost 5 months after Ukraine launched its counteroffensive, the situation on ground has not really changed. Ukraine has not made a serious breakthrough. Its operations have faltered due to heavily mined Russian defensive lines. Fighting is expected to slow down as the weather worsens. Ukraine struggles to sustain ally support. As if the current challenges are not enough, Ukraine now faces the risk of losing the sympathy of its allies. There's a growing sense of war fatigue in Europe, and now the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has openly admitted it. In a call she believed was with officials from the African Union, she mentioned that Europe is becoming wary of the Ukraine conflict. Take a look.
Sul lavoro, hai voglia di parlare di salario minimo, come se risolvesse il problema. L'unico modo di risolvere il problema. I can tell I will do my best, as always. I'll do my best for my greatest.
However, it is important to know that the call took place in September and was recently released online by Russian comedy duo Vovan and Lexus. They are accused of being a pro-Kremlin tool of information warfare, targeting high-profile Western figures. They have criticized Russia in the past for the Ukraine war. In response, Giorgia Meloni's office issued a statement expressing regret. Take a look.
Questo è il tempo della responsabilità. Questo è il tempo in cui, se si vuole far parte della storia, si deve capire.
The regret was over her being deceived by an imposter posing as the head of the African Union. She was pranked. However, this incident comes at a time when Ukraine's President Zelensky is urging the West to maintain its unwavering support for Ukraine. Zelensky said that the scariest thing is that some parts of the world have grown accustomed to the ongoing war in Ukraine, and he's not wrong. There is visible war fatigue. It is scary, especially for Ukraine and its allies, if the current war endures into the winter months. And to discuss this and a lot more, joining me now on the show is Mr. Sergej Samleny. He is the director of the European Resilience Initiative Center. He's joining me now live from Berlin. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having invited me today.
Right, my first question to you. Ukraine says Russia attacked more than 100 settlements in just 24 hours. This is all happening at a time when the world is focused on Gaza. Is there war fatigue in Europe at this point? I say this because of what just happened with the Italian Prime Minister.
Well, of course there is war fatigue in Europe, and of course that many European nations would wish that this war is over, and many are asking the question what to do further. But I don't think that many European nations are really ready to throw Ukraine under the bus. Of course, some of the European nations are, like Hungary, one of the nations which are, since the early this full-scale invasion, on the side of Russia, or since recently Slovakia, where absolutely pro-Russian prime minister has been elected recently. But if you look on countries like Poland or Germany or the Baltic states or the others, there are no serious politicians who would say that we need to stop our support for Ukraine. There are some voices who say, like, what can be done? We need to be realistic and not to promise too much. But it is not the discussion about the full stop.
Right. If this war does go into the crucial winter months, what does this mean for Ukraine?
Well, you already mentioned quite correctly, from my perspective, that Russia will try to do what Russia didn't manage to do last year. I mean, to switch off the Ukrainian power grid and to destroy Ukrainian electricity supply. But I think that it would be this time, it would be harder for Russia to achieve this goal, not only because Ukraine has more trained anti-air defense. Just remember, last year in October, Ukraine didn't have any IRIS-T, any Patriot, and any other sophisticated anti-air systems. Now Ukraine has them. And Ukraine now also developed its own systems of drones and can retaliate. So if Russia would try to hit Ukrainian energy grid, then Ukraine would do the same, at least at the border regions in Russia. I don't say that Putin cares about if his citizens in Bryansk or Kursk or other regions are freezing. He's not, of course. But at least it would cause some certain logistic problems, maybe some public outrage in outrage in Russia. And
Right.
anyway, Ukraine will have a feeling they control the situation.
Right, Mrs. Samleny, thank you so much for all your analysis, and thanks for joining us on Gravitas tonight.
Thank you so much.
Flooded streets, battered homes, severed communication lines. Storm Kieran has smashed into northwestern Europe, unleashing strong winds and heavy rain. Take a look. The storm was driven by a powerful jet stream that swept in from the Atlantic. It had already caused heavy flooding in Northern Ireland and parts of Britain. And now, Kieran has hit northern and western France, uprooting trees and blowing out windows. At least one death in Paris was confirmed. 1.2 million French households were left without electricity. Schools, airports and rail and ferry services were closed down.
This is unprecedented in France. It's the first time I've seen this. Normally, this is a tropical type of phenomenon, but it has reached the French coast and now it's in France. Normally, geographically speaking, it should be happening so much farther than here. But the planet is so upside down. How could such a storm not reach France when there's fewer fish in the sea now? It's like mankind is paying for what they've done, quite simply.
Nearly all coastlines of the French mainland were under severe weather warnings. Local trains were cancelled across a swathe of western France. Authorities have urged people to stay at home and avoid winds hitting over 200 kilometers per hour. France's Interior Minister said that over 1,300 people had to be relocated to campsites or shelters, and several houses were evacuated. The storm also battered southern England. In Britain, the Channel Islands were among the worst hit. Flights from airports on the islands of Jersey and Alderney were cancelled. Earlier, the storm, Kieran, hit the southern coast of England with high waves and rain striking Cornwall district's Penzance town. The UK's Met Department has issued a yellow warning for London and southeast England with an alert for bad to severe weather.
It's a storm that we haven't seen the likes of in a generation, in around 35, 36 years since 1987, when the Great Storm came through the islands and through the UK.
The British Isles have faced a wave of fierce weather over the last week. Parts of Northern Ireland were ravaged by floods on Monday and Tuesday. Days before the storm struck the southern coast, 3 people were killed and residential areas were inundated with waist-high waters. On January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus pandemic a global emergency. Then 3 years later, that is in May this year, the Intergovernmental Panel reversed its decision and declared an end to the emergency phase. However, experts have warned that even though the global public emergency phase might be over, the pandemic will be here to stay for quite some time. During the peak of the pandemic, millions of people globally were infected, and some even caught the virus twice or thrice, the results of which are visible to this day. According to research published by the University of Melbourne, of more than 665 million cases worldwide, nearly 1 in every 2 people with COVID-19 is at the risk of developing post-COVID neurological syndrome. It's also worth noting that a link between brain health and coronavirus infections has been known since the outbreak. So in this context, the long-term impact of COVID-19 on the brain may be the expectation rather than the exception. And for those enduring it, its impact is very real. Brain health is particularly at risk, something being felt by those in their 50s and above. The latest research published in Lancet claims to have found evidence that cognitive function and working memory in older people decline more rapidly during the pandemic, regardless of whether or not they were infected. While the world after COVID-19 is unlikely to return to the world that was, many of the problems which we face today will simply be more serious in nature. Analysis from Lancet adds that the rate of cognitive decline quickened in the first year of the pandemic and was higher among those who had already shown signs of mild cognitive decline before the pandemic. The pattern continued into the second year, which researchers said suggests an impact beyond the initial national lockdowns in the year 2020 and 2021. And that raises the most important question. Are people at a potentially higher risk of cognitive decline that can lead to dementia? Is COVID damaging your brain? While the statistics showed the effect that COVID-19 has on the brain health for people at large, in the United Kingdom particularly, the situation post-COVID became so dire that in England and Wales, COVID was no longer a threat because dementia and Alzheimer's disease became the leading cause of deaths last year. The figures published by the Office for National Statistics showed that while more than 22,000 people died due to COVID in 2022, On the contrary, more than 65,000 deaths were reported due to dementia. The pandemic prompted a historic shock to the UK economy. After its outbreak, the United Kingdom was one of the worst affected countries. While more than 7.6 million people lost their jobs in the onset of the pandemic, UK's then Prime Minister Boris Johnson had different concerns. Now, as claimed by Johnson's former top aide, Dominic Cummings, the former Prime Minister asked the UK government's top scientific advisors early in the pandemic if a special hairdryer could be used to kill COVID-19. I'm not making this up. Take a look. Cummings, who quit Johnson's government in late 2020 after falling out with him, used his 115-page witness statement and in-person testimony to assail his former boss's handling of the crisis. While it is now well established that people who have recovered from severe COVID-19 are showing different symptoms: brain fog, poor heart health, sudden fatigue. One thing is clear: we don't know enough about the Wuhan virus to rule it out as an emergency just yet.